So the next topic is social influence. And in social influence, we look at minority influence, we look at obedience, and then we look at conformity. So we will start with conformity. So the first section, we'll look at types of conformity, explanations of conformity. Now, it's important to know that there's a difference between the types of conformity and the explanations of conformity. So types of conformity are the different levels of conformity, how much you conform, and the explanations of conformity are why you conform. Now, within conformity, there are two named studies from the spec. So you've got a study by Ash and a study by Zimbardo, so you will need to remember those names. This is the social specification, and this is in your booklet. So you look at types of conformity, variables affecting conformity, and there's a study by Ash. Explanation for conformity, conformity to social roles. So there's a study by Zimbardo. Explanations for obedience, situational variables that affect obedience, and a study by Milgram that's named on the spec. Dispositional or personality explanations for obedience, explanations for resistance to obedience and conformity, minority influence, and the role of social influence processes in social change. So social influence. Social influence comes from the perspective of social psychology, and it looks at human behaviour influenced by other people and the context in which this behaviour occurs. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about social influence. And the examples you need to know include conformity, obedience, and minority influence. So just make sure that all the blanks in the booklet on page 4 are filled in. So conformity is this type of social influence where we want to fit in with a group. So this is either because we have a real pressure from the group, so having people physically around us that are maybe changing our behaviour, or imagined pressure, so social norms, expectations, as wanting to fit in, and it's about us yielding to group pressures. It's a form of majority influence. So majority influence is where you have most people doing one thing and someone else doing something different, and that one individual person goes to fit in with the majority. So conformity is an example of majority influence, and it's about yielding to group pressures. It's about trying to fit in with the group. So in your booklet, if we go here, you've got 3 scenarios. So you've got George and you've got Sally and you've got Parvinder. And if you read through the scenarios, you can have a think about, are these 3 people demonstrating conformity? So do you think the behaviour they're showing could be described as conformity? And if so, what could be the reasons for them conforming? So if you look through them individually, George, Sally and Parvinder, are they conforming? And if you think they are, why might they be conforming? Okay, so in terms of explanations for conformity, the fancy way to describe this is by calling it the dual process model. But this is basically saying that there's 2 explanations. You've got informational social influence and you've got normative social influence. And those are the 2 reasons why we conform. It's referred to as the dual process model. So it's got 2 parts, informational social influence and normative social influence. So informational social influence is conforming to be correct. So informational social influence usually happens in a situation where you don't feel informed, where you think that the task is unclear, where you don't have any previous knowledge, where you think you're with someone else who's more of an expert, and where you look to other people or you look to one other person to see what they are doing in order for you to be correct. So informational social influence is about conformity to be correct, to not be wrong, conforming to be right. So in your booklet, there's a definition. So it's more likely to happen in unfamiliar situations, in new situations, or where you feel like you are not an expert in that situation. So informational social influence, ISI, is conforming to be correct. There's an example in your booklet of Jess. So if you read through that, and if you want to pause it, because the answer's on the next slide. So one answer could be that Jess's behaviour is explained through ISI. She's conforming because she wants to be right and behave correctly. She looks to the other diners who she perceives to be more knowledgeable. She's looking to reduce her anxiety. So she looks at other people for guidance. And then you can suggest that she's perhaps changed her behaviour permanently, because when she goes back to a restaurant, she uses the information that she gained the last time. So ISI is more likely to involve a permanent change in opinion or behaviour. Normative social influence, or NSI, is conforming to fit in and be liked to gain acceptance in a group. So it's a desire to be liked, it's a desire to not be the odd one out. This tends to be more temporary. So if ISI is a more permanent change, NSI tends to be a temporary change, and normally it's caused by the presence of a group, and NSI will be removed if the group's presence is removed. So here you've got Ben. Ben's rocking up to meet his friends for a drink somewhere. Ben turns up with his Coke. He's looking at his friends that have a beer. What Ben does is he goes away, he comes back, and he changes his drink to a beer. So have a think. How is this NSI? What is Ben doing in order to fit in? Is this going to be temporary? Is this going to be permanent? So Ben's behaviour can be explained through NSI. He's conforming to the group as he wants to be accepted. He's drinking a different drink to fit in with them. He changes his behaviour to be the same as them because he's more likely to be rewarded with acceptance as their group. However, it's likely to be a temporary change, as if the group isn't there, or if he goes to get a drink again, he would more likely choose his favourite drink. So that's NSI. Conforming to be liked to fit in, it tends to be a more temporary thing. Now, as well as explanations for conformity, you've got types of conformity. So it's like levels of conformity. So you've got compliance, identification, and internalization. Compliance is like low-level conformity. Internalization is deep-level conformity. So compliance is normally short-term, it's public, it's temporary, and it's where you go along with a group to gain approval, but your private views don't change. So this is where you're in a group, someone's saying what music they like, you don't agree with them, but you say that you agree with them just as part of that conversation to fit in with that group. So that's compliance. So it's temporary, it's only public, and it will not last. It's a very shallow level of conformity. Identification is the next level. It's like medium level conformity. It's where you accept the opinions of a group or of a role. So if you're doing a certain job, you will conform to the values and the attitudes of that job. So it is slightly more permanent, or it lasts for as long as you are in that role. So if you have a job, or if you have a certain group of friends, if you are in a certain area, you might identify with that group, and then you take on the norms and the values of that group, and you conform in a way while you are in that group. So it's slightly more permanent than compliance, and it can involve a change in private and public views, albeit temporary. Then you have internalization, which is the deepest level of conformity. That is more likely to be permanent, it's more likely to be long-term, and it's more likely to involve a change in your public and your private views. So internalization is when you take on a whole new set of beliefs or views or opinions, and then they become your own. So it's a permanent change in your private and public views. So in terms of shallow to deep, you've got compliance, then identification, and then internalization. And internalization is looked at as kind of true conformity. It's when people really have changed from what they were thinking before to fit in with the majority group. There is a video here for you to watch on types of social influence, referring to the very factual and non-real life example of Friends. But it's a really good way in an episode of Friends to demonstrate compliance, identification, and internalization. So informational social influence is to be correct. Normative social influence is to be liked. There's different reasons why they happen. ISI is more likely to lead to internalization, and NSI is more likely to lead to compliance. So you can use this information to fill in page 7 and 8 in your booklet. There's an assessment question here about Jan and Nora. If you'd like to pause it and have a go at that. And then this is the answers to the Jan and Nora question. And there is an assessment question on page 8. Again, here's the question here. So if you would like to pause this and have a go at that question. On page 9, there's a revision exercise. And then this is the work that we have done today.